It isn't easy being human. We have to live with the awareness that nothing we love will endure. Soon after our death, no one will remember who we were, what we hoped for, or how hard we strove to give our lives some kind of acceptable meaning. No sooner are we gone than it will be as if we had never existed.
Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Like all higher life forms on Earth, we are confronted with every imaginable kind of physical and mental suffering. But on top of that, we also know that we cannot escape those ills, however hard we try. To
endure this hopelessness without despairing is no trifling matter. And it borders on the miraculous. And most of us master our lives so bravely, without succumbing to madness.
Faced with the experience of the absurd, the adversities of life and the injustices of the world, many people yearn for a happy end that would invest their existence with meaning. This is what has continued to make religion so attractive. Religion not only serves to numb the pain of existence, it is also the expression of an unconscious protest at a world which should not be the way it is. But religions have themselves made a not insignificant contribution both to the maintenance of social misery and to the decline of culture.
When Catholicism was made the state religion in 380 AD, a culture of dogma began to reign. The Church's authoritarian claim to truth and its dominant otherworldly philosophy paralyzed creativity and research, education and science. It wasn't until the Renaissance humanists of the 14th to 16th centuries that people rediscovered the legacy of antiquity and gradually freed themselves from the clutches of religion.
In the 19th century, Wilhelm von Humboldt took up Cicero's idea of humanitas and made it the foundation of a great educational reform, which led to the setting up of classical grammar schools all over Germany.
If there is an idea which runs through the whole course of history, it is that of humanity.
Humboldt hoped that the interaction with Greco-Roman culture would lead to a full development of the human being. But in practice, the concern for ancient languages mutated into the rigid learning by heart of Greek and Latin vocabulary. The principles of humanity were all but forgotten. Unlike the bourgeois humanism of Humboldt, which was oriented towards ancient Greece and Rome, socialist humanism was based on the belief in the revolutionary power of the proletariat. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were convinced that the working class was destined to overcome all forms of exploitation and lead humanity into the realm of freedom, in which
the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all.
But this dream too failed to come true. After the Stalinist purges and the atrocities of the Nazis, many of whom had received a humanist education, it was clear to most people that the ideals of humanity could be achieved neither via bourgeois nor via socialist humanism. But what was the way forward? The first Director General of UNESCO, Julian Huxley, put the problem in a nutshell.
The present uneasy age of disillusion, after two great wars, has witnessed a widespread breakdown of traditional beliefs.
Huxley feared that the lack of an adequate world view of our times would lead to chaos, despair, or escapism. In 1945, in a UNESCO policy paper, he outlined a framework which in 1961 gave rise to evolutionary humanism, a worldview that has gained many new supporters in recent years. Julian Huxley was born into one of England's most influential families of scholars in 1887. His grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, was Darwin's staunchest supporter and helped establish the theory of evolution. His brother Aldous Huxley attained international fame as the author of the science fiction novel Brave New World. His half-brother Andrew Huxley was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine. At first, it seemed that Julian Huxley would follow in the footsteps of his grandfather Thomas. His book, Evolution, The Modern Synthesis, makes him one of the founders of the modern synthetic theory of evolution. But unlike Thomas Huxley, Julian took an active part in international politics, playing a decisive role in the founding of UNESCO. Right at the outset, Huxley had urged that the proposed United Nations Organization for Education and Culture, UNESCO, should be expanded to UNESCO, the United Nations Organization for Education, Science and Culture. In 1946, the General Assembly elected him the first Director General of the new international organization. After his retirement from UNESCO, Huxley worked with a group of friends, philosophers, artists and scientists, to develop the concept of evolutionary humanism, which in the 1960s also attracted attention in Germany and elsewhere. Thereafter, interest in the idea rapidly faded. When Julian Huxley died in 1975 at the age of 87, it seemed as though the heyday of evolutionary humanism had definitely passed. But in recent years, evolutionary humanism has been rediscovered, due in large part to the work of the German philosopher and author Michael Schmidt-Salomon, who took up Huxley's ideas and updated them. This led in 2004 to the establishment of the Giordano Bruno Foundation, with which many renowned scientists, philosophers and artists are now affiliated. A unique network of people who support the goals of evolutionary humanism. The foundation is today supported by over 6,000 friends of the GBS and also by its 50 regional and university groups which stage events and campaigns in Germany, Austria and Switzerland. But what lies behind the concept of evolutionary humanism?
Evolutionary humanism harmonizes the principles of classical humanistic ethics with the results of modern scientific research. As evolutionary humanists, we stand for the values of the Enlightenment, for critical rationality, individual self-determination, for freedom and social justice. We no longer view human beings, however, as the pinnacle of creation, but rather as the Neanderthals of tomorrow. We naked apes really shouldn't flatter ourselves too much just because we've cast off our body hair and put on a smartwatch.
We are children of evolution. We are children of evolution. We are children
Promoting evolutionary thinking is one of the Giordano Bruno Foundation's central aims. In 2009, the Foundation utilised the 200th anniversary of Charles Darwin's birth and the 150th anniversary of the publication of his book On the Origin of Species to organise symposia, lectures and panel discussions, as well as a huge Darwin birthday party.
Happy birthday to you.
The campaign Evolution Day Not Ascension Day met with an astonishingly positive response in the media. A survey by a leading news magazine found that nearly 70% of readers were in favour of renaming the Ascension Day public holiday Evolution Day.
Evolution von dem Universum, wie die Erde entstanden ist. Vom Urknall und der Entstehung unseres Sonnensystems. Von der Ursuppe und den ersten einzelnen Urlebewesen. Es waren so welche kleinen Tiere im Wasser entstanden und danach sind die größer geworden, sind die zu Fische geworden. Danach sind Tiere am Land entstanden, so was Ähnliches wie Krokodile. Und danach sind daraus die Dinosaurier geworden. Menschenaffen. Ja, Menschenaffen. Früher waren die Menschen eigentlich Affen, aber die haben sich zu Menschen entwickelt. Und dann waren die ersten Affen, die auf zwei Beinen stehen konnten.
Die Evolutionstheorie ist sicherlich eine der wichtigsten Grundlagen für ein modernes
The theory of evolution is certainly one of the most important foundations for a modern worldview. Yet this theory isn't taught in our schools until quite late, whereas religious creation myths are often dealt with as early as the first grade. Children learn that there's a fundamental difference between humans and animals.
Hingegen meinen Evolutionsbiologen wie
Evolutionary biologists, such as myself, on the other hand, consider that we human beings are connected to other animals by an unbroken chain of life. The Evo-Kids project believes it is important and appropriate to convey this rewarding approach to school children as early as possible.
To develop a realistic idea of the world, children should be confronted with the discoveries of evolutionary biology as early as possible. That's why one of the Foundation's first task forces is devoted to the project Evo-Kids, Evolution in Primary School. Author Max Kruse provided his famous character Ormel and wrote a new book especially for the Foundation's Evo-Kids project called Ormel Hurtles Through Time. The book takes young readers on an amusing and exciting journey into the evolutionary past. Children are keen to learn more about the origin of life, and a knowledge of evolutionary processes helps them to develop an appropriate relationship to nature.
Wer die Prozesse der Evolution begreift, der versteht auch.
If you've grasped the processes of evolution, you understand that human consciousness didn't just suddenly fall from heaven. As beings that have arisen via evolution, we differ from other life forms only by degrees and not in principle.
Es mit Albert Schweitzer zu sagen,
as Albert Schweitzer put it, we are merely life that wants to live in the midst of life that wants to live. And that should be reflected in a more ethical way of treating non-human animals.
Dear fellow apes and apesses,
in 2011, the Giordano Bruno Foundation awarded its €10,000 ethics prize to the two initiators of the Great Ape Project, Paola Cavalieri and Peter Singer. The Great Ape Project demands certain basic rights, such as the right of personal freedom, the right to life, and the right to bodily integrity for our nearest animal relatives, the chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans. After the official celebration, Colin Goldner, a member of the Foundation's advisory board, assumed control of the German section of the project and joined forces with primatologist Volker Sommer to ensure the topic received greater public attention.
What we're involved with is nothing less than the imperative of breaking down the artificially erected speciesistic barriers in people's heads.
In spring 2014, a study by Goldner of the living conditions of great apes in German zoos was presented in Berlin by the Giordano Bruno Foundation in collaboration with various animal welfare and animal rights groups.
Many great apes show symptoms of massive psychological disorders. They can only cope with their miserable, stressful daily life in the zoo with the help of psychiatric drugs. As long as they continue to be considered property that can be exploited, sold and killed, these circumstances will not change.
Schade nur, dass ich nicht glauben kann, dass Giordano Bruno selbst im Himmel sitzt und das alles beobachtet. Und ich finde es auch recht passend, dass also von Giordano Bruno genannt ist, weil er ist so ein Held für Redefreiheit und Meinungsfreiheit.
The call for great apes to be accorded basic rights encounters special resistance from people who view themselves as made in God's image. Which brings us to an issue for which the Giordano Bruno Foundation has acquired a certain notoriety.
We stand for an ethics based on the interests of human beings and all other animals rather than a godly morality. We stand for this life, not the afterlife, for pagan delights, not torments in hell.
For the Catholic World Youth Day in Cologne in 2005, the Foundation initiated a religion-free zone offering Youth Day refugees asylum under the motto "Pagan delights, not torments in hell."
Die sogenannten christlichen Werte, die Politiker und Journalisten gerne im Munde führen, in ihrem Kern eben auch zutiefst inhuman und eine totalitäre Ausrichtung haben.
Für den Herren, die sich bergen gegen Freude hier und heute nicht in ihr Jammertal.
The Foundation delights in art and satire, frequently employing them to draw attention to the issues it addresses. The artist Wolfram Kastner, dressed as the Pope, strolled through the streets of Munich, Berlin and Trier at the side of a Hitler impersonator to draw attention to the consequences even today of the Reichskonkordat, the agreement Nazi Germany signed with the Vatican in 1933.
Sie haben einen der bekanntesten antifaschistischen Künstler hier,
The best measure of how free a society is can be found in how much freedom it grants artists, and especially satirists.
Ich finde es wichtig, dass man sich engagiert, dass man
I think it's important to be active and to get involved, to proclaim one's atheist or non-religious position loud and clear, and to seek contact with groups that hold similar views. You sit at your desk all your life and draw bulbous noses for yourself, and then suddenly you're giving a speech to a load of bulbous noses.
Many people take freedom for granted, but it had to be fought hard for and can be lost if it isn't defended.
The Foundation responded particularly sensitively to the so-called caricature controversy triggered by the publication of 12 cartoons of Muhammad in the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten. When politicians began calling for a tightening of legal sanctions on blasphemy, the Giordano Bruno Foundation started a petition to reinforce freedom of thought, artistic freedom and freedom of the press.
Ich kam von einer Reise zurück und habe an dem Tag den Fernseher.
I came home from a trip and turned on the TV that day and suddenly saw embassies burning and people dying. And above all, I saw the reaction of the West, which was deeply confused. Straight away, they were saying we have to show restraint. We can't just make fun of religion like that. That's going too far.
Ich war so empört daraufhin, weil
I was so disgusted because it was my profession they were attacking. It was about cartoons. So I sat down and drew 6 or 7 cartoons about it in a single morning.
In Deutschland dürfen Homosexuelle offen ihren Lebensstil ausleben und seit kurzem sogar heiraten. Wie ist Ihre Einstellung zu sexuellen Minderheiten? Allah hasst die Schwulen und sie sollen zur Strafe ihrer Schande von der Spitze des höchsten Berges in die Tiefe gestürzt werden. Nun, diese Antwort bringt uns in Schwierigkeiten. Halten Sie mich bitte nicht für islamfeindlich, aber wenn Sie mit Ihrer Frau nach Norddeutschland einwandern wollen, haben wir ein Problem. In Schleswig-Holstein gibt es keine Berge, aber wie wär's mit Bayern? Auch gut.
Shortly after the cartoon's controversy, the Giordano Bruno Foundation joined a campaign initiated by the president of the International Committee Against Executions, Mina Ahadi. Together with the Canadian beauty queen Nazanin Afshin-Jam, Mina Ahadi was protesting against the death sentence handed down against the 18-year-old Nazanin Fatahi in Iran after she had resisted a group of rapists. Thanks to the blood money that was collected in the course of the campaign, Nazanin was released from prison at the beginning of 2007. This successful rescue operation was the beginning of the Foundation's long-standing collaboration with Mina Ahadi.
Almost daily I get calls from Iranian death cells, from teenagers, women, people who often have done nothing more than abandon their religion or have extramarital sex. We try to save these people. In the Giordano Bruno Foundation I found an important partner. They've been a great help to us, and together we've been able to save many victims of political Islam. It's very important.
In 2007, in collaboration with the Giordano Bruno Foundation, Mina Ahadi presented the Central Council of Ex-Muslims and its campaign, We Have Forsworn. Never before had former Muslims so openly admitted having renounced Islam, an act for which the Quran prescribes the death penalty. Since then, organizations of ex-Muslims have sprung up in many other countries of the world, following the German example. Criticism of religion is essential as long as people continue to sacrifice their life in this world for purported bliss in the next. This was also stressed by Julian Huxley, who presided over the founding Congress of the International Humanist and Ethical Union and had, together with Albert Einstein and Thomas Mann, sat on the founding advisory board of the First Humanist Society of New York. 2007 was also the year that saw broad public debate about the so-called New Atheism. In all media, there were extensive arguments about the supposed crusade of the New Atheists. In German-speaking countries, it was primarily representatives of the Giordano Bruno Foundation who were given a chance to speak. The media hype had been triggered by the success of the book The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, who, in the same year, was awarded the Giordano Bruno Foundation's Deschner Prize.
It's of course a huge honor and pleasure for me to receive this prize, especially in the name of Karlheinz Deschner, and of course especially from a foundation named after the immortal Giordano Bruno.
The foundation named its prize for criticism of religion and ideology after the author of The Criminal History of Christianity, Karlheinz Deschner. Herbert Steffen, who established the Giordano Bruno Foundation in 2004, supported the church critic Deschner from the beginning of the 1990s until his death in April 2014.
Half-truths and quarter-truth. Have you no shame? 2,000 years of a church of love. We're all brothers and sisters here. We communicate in dialogue. We belong together.
I would gladly believe you, but your church has spent 2,000 years persecuting people and has killed millions.
2,000 years of love.
2,000 years of persecuting Jews, 2,000 years of persecuting heretics.
Oh, stop making up such historical nonsense.
Historical nonsense? You have to understand that the church has had enormous power. That's why no one dared to oppose them for centuries. It's only now that we're gradually coming to be in a position to publicly criticize the church. For me to say something like this on television would have still been impossible a few years ago.
Der evolutionär denkende Mensch,
evolutionary man, can no longer take refuge from his loneliness by creeping for shelter into the arms of a divinized father figure, whom he himself has created.
If you can split the atom, says Michael Schmidt-Salomon, and communicate with satellites, you have to possess the necessary emotional and intellectual maturity. And a mythology that's 2,000 years old and was developed by a culture of primitive herdsmen won't help us there one bit. Thank you.
With the global surge of fundamentalism, criticism of religion continues to be necessary, but it's not an end in itself. The fact that we're still viewed primarily as an organization critical of religion is because of the ongoing tendency of religions to stand in the way of those rights of self-determination that we humanists campaign for.
We pursue policies in Germany that are constantly prepared to limit basic rights in order to satisfy fundamentalists.
Today, Parliament established legal certainty. Infants may be circumcised from birth onwards.
Members of Parliament have reacted to a judgment by the Cologne District Court. It had ruled that circumcision constitutes grievous bodily harm, unleashing hefty criticism from Jews and Muslims.
The right of self-determination and the right to bodily integrity were at the centre of the campaign "My Body Belongs to Me," with which the Foundation intervened in the debate over the circumcision of boys.
Especially considering that the court did nothing more than apply the law on the basis of the Constitution. We need to ask ourselves, which is more important, religion or the law?
It's also about the consequences these children have to deal with all their lives, and then the Parliament comes along and, flustered by the pressure from religious organisations, says no debate.
Thus far, I've had the feeling that a sensitivity towards this topic was lacking, and that people simply tolerated children being subjected to injury. No one had thought about it or taken the risks into consideration.
A debate on this issue is urgently needed and must be allowed to happen.
Shocking cases of child abuse and rape cause great suffering to the victims and their families.
Those affected want public acknowledgement of the injustice they suffered. We, as the Giordano Bruno Foundation, decided to take a stand for the victims, to provide a counter to the powerful churches with their plentiful opportunities to put their own version across to the public.
In 2010, the Giordano Bruno Foundation helped to focus public attention on the fate of the many children who had been abused and deprived of their rights in homes and boarding schools. Together with victims' advocacy groups, the foundation organised a mass demonstration in Berlin as well as a press conference for and by those formerly in institutional care. Protecting the right of self-determination is also a central concern of the Foundation's campaigns to criticise Islam. Self-determination, not forced conformity, was the motto of the second Critical Islam Conference, which the Giordano Bruno Foundation held in Berlin in conjunction with other organisations in May 2013. The conference provided the first ever opportunity for Islam critics, ex-Muslims and liberal Muslims to adopt a joint position against both xenophobia and reactionary defence of Islam, as well as opening up new perspectives in the debate on cultural integration.
It's important that we de-Islamicize the integration debate. When we talk about integration, we shouldn't be talking about Islam as a school subject or about the training of imams, because that doesn't lead to integration. For integration to succeed, it's important that young Muslims have access to the job market and that we break down the mental barrier that exists between German society and Muslims.
To preserve this democracy, I call upon the state to adopt more secular attitudes and keep religion right out of public and official life.
The disregard of rights of self-determination was also targeted in the campaign against religious discrimination in the workplace, which the Foundation mounted in 2010 together with the International League of Non-Religious and Atheists and Alibri Publishers.
Und das ist echt der Hammer. Denn die Kirche ist ja, das wissen Sie, nicht nur der zweitgrößte Arbeitgeber in Deutschland, sondern auch mit Abstand der unsozialste. Au! Was soll denn das? Das darfst du gar nicht. Bin doch längst ausgetreten aus deinem Verein. Aua, au!
More and more people are refusing to accept the ways the big church-run charities restrict their employees' human and basic rights. There's no right to strike, and the industrial relations law is not applicable. It's obvious that the special church labour law has to be abolished, because the churches aren't even paying for the old people's homes, hospitals and kindergartens they run.
Rights of self-determination are also withheld from people at their life's end. And here too, religious prejudice plays a big part. It was for this reason that the Giordano Bruno Foundation worked together with other humanist organizations in 2014 to publicize the campaign "My Death Belongs to Me," after Federal Health Minister Helmut Gröhe declared he would move to ban medically assisted suicide. One of the main proponents of the campaign is Berlin euthanasia Dr. Uwe-Christian Arnold.
Man darf das Recht auf Leben nicht mit einer Pflicht.
We mustn't confuse the right to life with a supposed duty to live. In a modern, enlightened society, very seriously ill patients should have a right to the very best end-of-life care, which includes not just having the best palliative medicine available, but also having the right to decide to end one's life with the help of a doctor, when life becomes unbearable.
Dann habe ich heute bekommen diese schöne Zeichnung von Herrn Haderer. Ungleiche Zwillinge, hier die erste Hilfe, da die letzte Hilfe, also die Sterbehilfe. Wunderbar.
Surveys reveal that more than 80% of the German population advocate the right of self-determination when it comes to their own death, a clear indication of the strong trend towards secularization that has swept across Western Europe and especially Germany in recent years. Social scientist Carsten Frerk, who established the Research Group on World Views in Germany, with the Foundation's help, has been able to document this trend via numerous studies.
What we currently have in Germany is about 36% with no religion, that is, they're not church members, 30% Catholics and 29% members of Protestant churches, so people with no religious affiliation make up the largest single group. And if we look at the cities, you can see a clear and persistent trend. More and more cities, even in the western part of Germany, are predominantly non-religious. In Berlin and Hamburg, for example, it's already 60 to 70%. But even Düsseldorf turned predominantly non-religious last year. This general trend is also reflected in European case law, which increasingly respects the rights of individuals over the rights of corporations and churches. The individual says, "I want to live my life my own way," and that position has many supporters. And there are many ideas about how to implement it. Long live variety!
But many public institutions have been slow to recognize this change of attitude. This became clear in 2009 when a group known as the Godless Seven, to which Carsten Frerk belonged, decided to undertake a German version of England's atheist bus campaign.
Berlin was plastered with posters declaring "Values require God."
Unlike other European countries, Germany's public transport providers refused to allow their buses to carry the slogan, "There is, with a probability verging on certainty, no God. A fulfilled life needs no faith."
You're allowed to say Jesus saves and Jesus loves you on all the underground trains, and you're allowed to run ads for Berlin's biggest brothel. But they ban ads for a naturalistic worldview.
So the Godless Seven resolved to make a virtue of necessity, hired their own double-decker bus and set off on a tour all over Germany to promote secularism. The bus campaign visited more than 30 towns and cities and was a huge public relations success. Campaigns like the Secular Bus Campaign, the founding of a humanist press service, as well as the many appearances in the media by representatives of the Giordano Bruno Foundation, have significantly changed the climate of public debate about worldviews.
Still a believer, or have you started thinking yet?
God is dead, so enjoy life.
God is a claim put forward by human beings. Is there the slightest proof of God?
Yes, Jesus.
Religious indoctrination is discussed much more openly these days than it was a few years ago, and the privileges of the two main churches are increasingly being challenged.
Wie sehr sich die Verhältnisse gewandelt haben.
I realized just how much things had changed when I was giving a speech at the close of the No Power to Dogmas rally. In 2005, we had barely managed to get 200 people out on the streets for the World Youth Day protest. In 2011, there were 15,000 people demonstrating against the Pope's speech to the German Parliament. Why isn't the Catholic Church judged by the same standards as other institutions? Wouldn't any other organization with a similar criminal record have long since been put under surveillance by the constitutional authorities? We call on German politicians to abandon their false respect for the churches.
Of course, the changes that have occurred over the last few years can't be attributed solely to the work of the Giordano Bruno Foundation, but we have definitely made our own small contribution.
The 10th anniversary provided an occasion for the responsible persons to reflect more deeply on the future direction of the Foundation's work. In future, there is to be greater focus on the positive side of evolutionary humanism.
It isn't enough just to criticize the churches. We have to develop an alternative, understandable and accepted worldview that people who are willing to think can identify with.
Nicht nur die Giordano Bruno Stiftung, sondern insgesamt.
It isn't just the Giordano Bruno Foundation, but rather the whole of the Enlightenment movement that has an image problem. Philosophers of the Enlightenment who believe neither in deliverance from evil nor in the resurrection of the dead have a reputation for replacing hopeless illusions with bleak truths. It's not surprising that this deters a lot of people.
That's why in future we want to make clear that there is hope, even when illusions have been overcome.
Michael Schmidt-Salomon published a book to coincide with the Foundation's 10th anniversary, in which he expresses the positive message of evolutionary humanism in a special way. In Hoffnung Mensch, he shows how humanity, in the course of its cultural evolution, has become more and more adept at fathoming the secrets of nature. How it has invented ever cleverer technological and medical procedures, created artworks of stunning beauty, and gradually freed itself from the shackles of racism, nationalism and sexism.
Der Urquell aller technischen Errungenschaften ist die Neugier und der Spieltrieb des bastelnden und grübelnden Forschers und nicht minder die konstruktive Fantasie des technischen Erfinders.
Vergessen wir nicht, wo die Menschheit noch.
Let us not forget where humanity stood at the beginning of the 20th century. People still knew nothing about the Big Bang, other galaxies and black holes. nothing about the goings-on in the atom and in the sun. They knew nothing yet about the significance of DNA, the neuronal basis of consciousness and the possibilities of the internet. Their medical knowledge was so limited that even the tiniest cuts could result in death. In ethical political terms, too, people lived in another age. Democracies were few and far between, and what few democratic countries there were, of course, refused women the right to vote. Minorities were ruthlessly persecuted, lesbians and gays discriminated against, children were beaten, racism and chauvinism were booming, and war was greeted with such great enthusiasm that you'd think it was an international sporting event.
For thousands of years, countless people all over the world have worked to help ensure that humanity was able to make astonishing progress in the fields of science, technology, medicine, art, ethics, and politics. Tragically, many of these intellectual pioneers were rewarded not with esteem, but with ostracism. More than a few even paid for their commitment with their lives, such as the French revolutionary and women's rights activist Olympe de Gouges, who was guillotined in Paris in 1793, or Giordano Bruno, who was burnt at the stake in Rome in 1600 by the so-called Holy Inquisition. But in the long run, cultural progress could not be stayed. Of course, it did not come about everywhere to the same degree, but it is no coincidence that the countries where technological and legal development have proceeded furthest are also the ones with the highest degree of secularization. Largely secularized Western Europe is today, despite the Euro crisis and an increasing redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich, the most stable and peaceful region that human history has ever experienced. A more rational, fairer global public policy could ensure that similar conditions arise in other parts of the world over the next few decades. This dream has inspired many millions of people worldwide who are today working to make it reality. Despite massive resistance, they are striving to create better conditions for human and non-human life forms around the world. The Giordano Bruno Foundation is only one small part of this global emancipation movement. What distinguishes it from other organizations is that it is not concerned with just one specific topic, like the environment, assisted dying, animal rights, or criticizing religion, but adopts a more general approach. The evolutionary humanism it espouses allows clear positions on many different issues. But unlike religions, it offers no doctrine of salvation. For evolutionary humanism knows neither sacred prophets nor holy scriptures that can evade criticism. And so the evolutionary humanism of today differs from the proposal advanced by Julian Huxley 50 years ago, and in the future, it will doubtless assume other forms again, which will differ radically from the present opinions of the Giordano Bruno Foundation.
Anders als die meisten theologischen Lehrgebäude,
unlike most theologies, it accepts the inevitability and indeed the desirability of change, and advances by welcoming a new discovery, even when it conflicts with old ways of thinking.
For far too long now, human thinking has been governed by rigid political or religious ideologies. Even today, these ideologies have a devastating influence on international politics. But it may well be that this will change over the next few decades. For nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come.